My name is Janet Knodel. I'm the Extension Entomologist and Professor at NDSU here in Fargo. I'd like to acknowledge my co-workers, Pat Bose, he's in the Extension Entomology program, Anitha Chirmamilla, and Brian Hansen at the Langdon REC, and Dave Grafstrom and Don Velkson at the University of Minnesota at the Canola Research Center there in Roseau. We have two different species of flea beetle that attack canola and can cause significant yield losses. The dominant one is the crucifer flea beetle on the right. It's a very dark black metallic colored flea beetle when you see it in the sun. Very small, about an eighth of an inch or less. And then the other species on the left is the striped flea beetle. And as you can see, it has two orange colored stripes running down the wing covers. Now, both these beetles have the enlarged hind leg that they use for jumping. And you can use this behavior of jumping around in the canola field as a means to identify flea beetles. We did quite a bit of survey work. Uh, 2018 was the last year we surveyed for the flea beetles in the canola swath. And as you can see, the crucifer flea beetle is widely distributed throughout the canola production areas. And if you look at the red triangle at the bottom, you can see that the red triangle here is more than 1,000 total flea beetles per 100 sweeps. So that's a very high number of flea beetles. So this is the most dominant species that we see. And then on the other map for the striped flea beetle, if you look at the red triangle, you'll see it's just more than 75 per flea beetles per 100 sweeps. So it's much lower. But again, you can see the striped flea beetle is widely distributed throughout the canola growing areas of North Dakota. And we seem to have the highest populations in the northeast area. Just a quick review on the life cycle of Phyllotria flea beetles. We'll start with the spring population, that is the adults emerging from their overwintering sites. And they'll start to feed on volunteer canola and weeds that they like to feed on in the crucifery plant family. And then they'll mate, and the females will lay eggs, up to 100 eggs per female. And it takes about 12 days for these eggs to hatch into larvae. And that's usually egg laying is late May, I would say, to June. However, the overwintering spring flea beetles are starting to die off by late June into early July. And then the larvae will feed on the roots, the secondary roots, but they can tunnel into the main tap root as well. And they mature in about 25 to 34 days. And they pass through 3 larval instars or growth stages. Then we go to the pupal stage, and that takes about 7 to 9 days to transform into the adult beetle. And you could see the pupal stage kind of looks like the adult flea beetle. You can see the eyes, you can see the legs and the wings, and all those appendages are kind of loosely next to the body of the pupa. And from there, the the summer, we call it the summer generation, will come out in July and all the way up through August. They live and they feed on the canola later on in flowering through potting. And they eventually, as the temperatures start to cool down and the day length is getting shorter, They'll start to move to their overwintering sites, which are commonly in leaf litter and debris in shelter belts. For crop damage, they do a significant reduction on crop stand. As you can see in the top picture, the untreated canola has huge gaps in the stand versus one that was treated with insecticide seed treatment has a much better stand. And they also slow down plant growth, and they can, kill the plant outright by feeding on it. And this causes delayed maturity, so you'll have an uneven harvest. Some plants will be ready to harvest and other plants won't be. And of course, the significant yield loss when you have economic populations of flea beetle. In the lower right picture, you can see the feeding from the flea beetle. They have chewing mouth parts and they make pits, and this kind pits can coalesce into holes in the leaves, and they feed both on the upper surface as well as the lower surface of the leaf. And the striped flea beetle has been shown to actually feed on the stems. You can see the notch in the stem in the lower arrow, and that can actually kill the plant, 100% mortality if it's a large enough notch that a seedling plant, the top will just fall right off, killing the growing point. And we've also observed flea beetles feeding on the new growth coming out of the top of the canola in the seedling stage. So you could see in the left picture that there's a lot of necrosis where the flea beetles killed that growing point, that tender growing point. So if we look at the canola growth stages, the most susceptible period is from the Knodel to the 4 to 6 leaf stage. After it gets to the 6 leaf stage, that plant can tolerate flea beetle feeding, and it most likely, if the weather conditions are conducive for canola growth, it'll be able to outgrow any feeding injury. And then for that new generation that comes out in the middle of summer, that can feed on the flowering, usually it's late flowering to the podding stage. They typically do not cause yield loss. The populations need to be extremely high. You have to have close to 300 beetles per plant to see any yield loss because they typically feed at the top of the canola pods, and the bottom canola pods are where you get your highest yield from. So here's how we do canola flea beetle ratings or damage on the plant. We use percent defoliation, and these are computer generated images that show the percent defoliation. And this 25% is considered the economic threshold on when you would need to apply a foliar insecticide to save the canola from yield loss. For scouting, we recommend that you do it frequently, especially in the spring, depending on weather conditions and also the flea beetle pressures you have in your area. Walk a W pattern and check 5 locations and look at 10 plants and assess the percent defoliation to see if you're at threshold or not. And then calculate an overall average out of all the 50 plants that you looked at the 5 total locations. So, and here we have Jeff Bertelli and Pat Bose on their hands and knees doing some counts and defoliation of flea beetle. And it is a situation where you really do need to get down and look closely at those seedling plants. However, weather can impact flea beetle feeding a lot. Usually when it's cool and wet, the flea beetles do not fly as readily into fields and they're more likely to crawl into the field edges and cause problems, maybe just in the field edge. And that's what happened this last year in 2024. You'll recall we had a cool, wet spring. So, and usually when this happens, it's favorable conditions for canola growth. So you get to end up with a good plant stand. However, when we have hot conditions and droughty conditions, you're probably going to end up with a poor plant stand due to flea beetles. And you can have hot spots with flea beetles depending on where they're moving out of if the shelter belt is close by that they overwintered in. So, since the spring population of flea beetles is the one we're most concerned with, we've relied on insecticide seed treatments to control flea beetles and usually these insecticide seed treatments are combined with the fungicide seed treatments for control of seedling and seed-borne diseases. So in here you can see most commonly we use a neonicotinoid for controlling the flea beetles and it's systemic, so it's translocated, it's washed off the seed, absorbed by the roots and translocated throughout the plant in the seedling stage. So, and here's a list from the insect guide on insecticide seed treatments that we have registered for flea beetle in canola. And again, we've relied heavily on the neonicotinoid insecticides, thiamethoxam, Helix fibrans is one I'll talk about today, clothianidin and Prosper Everglow. And then there's also imidacloprid available. And then we have the diamines group 28, and their trade names are Fortenza and Lumiderm, and the butanolids, which is the newest insecticide and new mode of action 4D. Buteo is the trade name in canola. So we did some research to look at the optimal insecticide seed treatment for controlling the spring population of Phylotrita species. And we looked at several different production areas, Fargo and Langdon, and then also in Roseau, Minnesota. I'll just be presenting the North Dakota results today. So here's the active ingredients that we tested, Helix fibrans and Prosper Everglow, neonicotinoids, and then the rates we used. And then we have the Lumiderm and Fortenza, the diamines, group 28, and then the Buteo the butanolids 4D. And then we also followed up with a pyrethroid foliar insecticide at whenever they reach the threshold 25% defoliation, and that was Brigade 2EC, which is bifenthrin. So I just want to be clear what a premix seed treatment is. So when I say premix, you know what it is. That means you have two active ingredients or modes of action. So we usually combine the neonicotinoids with the diamines. So it's not just a diamine out there. It's combined here in the US. So I'll be referring to Helix fibrans and Fortenza. It's the same thing as Lumiderm and Prosper Everglow plus Lumiderm. And then another set is the neonics with the butanolids, Prosper Everglow, and Buteo Start. So and then we assess flea beetle feeding injury at 3, 7, 10, and 14 days after emergence. And I've developed a scale. It just goes a little quicker than estimating defoliation of 0 to 6. However, the scale is closely related to defoliation. So you can see 0 is 0 pits on the seedling leaves, and then also 1 to 6 increasing to a number 6, which is plant death, and the economic threshold would be about 2.5. So here's the first 3 days after emergence, and this is looking at flea beetle feeding injury. And we combine the locations, Fargo and Langdon, and you could see the fungicide check, no insecticide, had the highest injury rating as you would expect, and it was significantly higher from all the other insecticide seed treatments that we tested. And here we have just the neonic alone, Vibrance. And then here we have the premix, Helix Vibrance plus Fortenza. And then here in the red boxes are where we also applied the foliar insecticide. We had very heavy pressures in 2023, and we got excellent results, as you can see here. The foliar on top did make a difference in all of the insecticides that we tested, but it usually wasn't significantly different. Sometimes it was, like here with the Prosper, Everglow, and Lumiderm, and then the premix with the Brigade. So if we look at 7 days after emergence, we again see the fungicide check over on the right had the highest injury and the same trends. Again, the premix plus the foliar insecticide Brigade provided the lowest flea beetle injury, and not always though was it significantly different, but in the orange bar for the 7-day after emergence, it was for Helix Vibrance and Fortenza, and also for Prosper Everglow and Lumiderm, but it was not with the Beetle Start and Prosper Everglow. So moving now to the 10-day after emergence, again, we had significantly higher pressure in the fungicide check, and we saw the same trend as we did in day 3 and 7 with the premix and the foliar insecticide providing the most optimal control. And finally, at the 14-day after emergence, again, we saw the same thing. Some of the insecticide seed treatments, I believe, were starting to wane because we started to see some increase. So this foliar insecticide that was applied will be provided with 7-day residual typically for control of flea beetle. But again, we saw the same trend with the premix and the foliar providing the best control. Okay, now look at the yield in bushels or pounds per acre. And you can see that the on fungicide check had the lowest yield of 1762.9 pounds per acre. And then if the red boxes with the premix and the foliar provided the highest yield. This probably better shows the differences with the injury and yield, looking at the relationship. Again, we had very heavy flea beetle pressures that year. Again, the untreated check had the highest injury rating and then the lowest yield, followed by the single seed treatment, the neonicotinoids, but it was 25% higher than the untreated check. And here's the premix alone. It was 10% higher than the single seed treatment. And then here's the premix seed treatments plus the foliar insecticide on top. It was 16% higher than the premix seed treatment and 27% higher than the single seed treatment, the neonics. So it's pretty clear when you have heavy pressures that you're going to put more inputs into controlling the flea beetle, pre-mix seed treatment with 2 modes of action plus a foliar insecticide on top. So we did look at the economics here. This is 2023 prices that I used, 28.10 cents per hundredweight. And then here's the yield. So here's the value of that crop per acre. And seed treatment inputs here with the seed treatments and the foliar costs with application. So this is our total cost that we would incur, and you can see the light yellow indicates the foliar, which had the highest total input cost that the grower would have. However, we also saw the highest net increase or return with the foliar and the premix. You got 275, 272, 278. And for the check, it was only about $500 net. But this is the difference from the untreated check in this column, but you can see the yield was the highest, 773, 768, and 771 compared to the other seed treatments. And we did run a foliar too on the side, and this is how much, we returned. For foliar, this was applied twice, 718, but it still wasn't as high as what we got with the seed treatments plus the foliar. So the take-home message is that we had optimal yield and control of flea beetles with the premixes plus the foliar insecticide, followed by the premix seed treatment alone, and then the single seed treatment neonicotinoids, and then the fungicide check. So the addition of a foliar spray on top of the seed treatment is often necessary to protect the canola crop, especially under those heavy pressures. And today we have a mix of the species of flea beetle. And as you know, the striped flea beetle has developed resistance to the neonicotinoid and insecticide seed treatments. So in order to control these mixed group species of flea beetles, we need to use 2 different modes of action now. And also we see the infestations are being extended. Flea beetles live for about a month in their longevity, so you can be active feeding on that canola all the way through June. Typically, the peak emergence is the last week of May. There is some other future IPM strategies for flea beetle. Host plant resistance is one of them. And up in Canada, they found a hairy canola plant, and they're isolating the genetics on this and going to find try incorporating it into some new hybrids. But these hairy on the leaves and stems, the flea beetles do not like it, and they do not prefer these plant. In fact, in their research, it surpassed the protection level provided by the neonicotinoid seed treatments. Also, there's RNA interference or RNAi, foliar sprays coming out. And what happens there is the pest will eat the leaves and then the interfering RNA enters the insect's stomach that silences a gene that is essential for cell division. And following that, the pest cannot function, new cells, and eventually will die. So there's a lot of work being done on that, and there is RNAi available for some other significant pests like Colorado potato beetle, and they're commercially available right now for that species. They're very safe to the beneficials and pollinators, the RNAi, because it's specific to the species. So you can find out more about foliar insecticides. We've tested all of them that are registered, and some that are not registered. And as far as we know, there is no resistance in the foliar insecticides for control of flea beetles yet, so that's good news. And also sign up for our NDSU Extension Crop and Pest Report so you can get updates on pest and weather, agronomy, and much more. You just can go to the website, enter your email. And I'd like to thank the Northern Canola Growers Association for their funding support of our flea beetle research.